Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Upping Your Game, How Compliance and Risk Management Move to 2030 and Beyond. I am joined in this special limited podcast series by Nick Gallo, the co-CEO at Ethico and the sponsor of this podcast series. This is one of the most exciting podcast series that I've ever been associated with. I'm thrilled to have you with me, Nick, and I can't wait to talk about how compliance can up their game and how you see this from the Ethico side of things as really not only a game changer, but frankly, I think a mandate for compliance professionals. You want to give some introductory remarks?
Yeah. I would just say, I think you're exactly right. We're at this inflection point that I'm talking about all the time where the next 10 years can look way different than the last 10 years, but it's going to take us doing things different. And we now have this tool with myriad applications right at our fingertips that can really elevate our impact in the organization and, as you say, up our game and how we show up and how we activate the human sensors and how we allow leadership to frame out their view of us. I'm super excited about this. There's just so much opportunity right now to really bend the curve and really excited to dive in and so glad to be here.
One of the things we're going to do different in this series is we're going to co-host. I'm not a guest. Nick's not a guest. We're going to co-host this. So I'm going to start off with letting you host me for a little bit, Nick.
Yeah, cool. You wrote this book called Upping Your Game. What was the spark behind it? Why did you feel that now was the time to write it and bring these insights to the compliance profession?
Nick, as everyone in the compliance world knows, the president announced a suspension of FCPA investigation and enforcement in early February. And as much as all of us knew something was coming, I think it was still a pretty big shock to all of us. And certainly for me, I struggled with what was the response beyond the law, still the law, pointing my finger and saying, don't pay bribes. And actually, the inspiration of this book came from our good friend Hui Chen, who in my mind is, if not the, certainly one of the top compliance or commentators in compliance. And she wrote a blog post where she challenged compliance professionals to up their game. And she said exactly what you said, Nick. We are at an inflection point. And for me, that inflection point was, if there is not going to be enforcement of anti-bribery laws, how does compliance stay at the forefront of mind? And more importantly, how do we sell to business leaders the need for compliance? Hui Chen said we should up our game with ethics in compliance. I wanted to take things in a little bit different direction, and I wanted to take a technologies approach. And one of the reasons I was so excited to have you join me on this podcast series is you don't come out of the compliance world. You come out of a completely different world. You look at things differently, and you're always looking at how can I create business value with greater efficiency. So I wanted to write a book about how compliance could bring greater business value with greater efficiency and drive compliance into the business operations of risk management. So I saw AI as the way to do that. Obviously, many are talking about AI in our profession. So I wanted to break down for people how AI can be used in each part of a compliance program, from risk management to policies and procedures to training to third parties and everything in between. And then how could I write something that compliance professionals could utilize for lessons learned in each of those areas? But the biggest part for me, Nick, was what's the business case? And one of the people I interviewed was Carl Hahn, and he said, Tom, everything I did in compliance was how does this bring value to the business? And I know you've never said those words before, but that's exactly what you talk about.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I think to that point, I think the departments or the programs whose sole value is viewed as risk mitigation or just I'm avoiding FCPA fines to boil it down, they're in a particularly both vulnerable position, but they also have a really unique opportunity to show up in a different way. If the business views you only as, again, FCPA avoidance, you can start to show up in some different ways to really break that frame. And I love your book because it gives some great ideas across these different aspects of of a program on how folks can leverage it. Nobody I talk to ever has like enough resources. They all have headcount that they want. They have extra tools that they need and so forth. And I just love some of the ideas that you talk about in the book that people can use as like a recipe book for themselves, or it also can spark them to start exploring this tool and applying it in some different ways.
So the fundamental transformation that I see has another reason, Nick, and I'd really like your thoughts on this, which is if compliance doesn't evolve, if it doesn't change, if it doesn't bring greater business value with more efficiency, my fear is compliance will be consigned to some technical function that they'll have one or two people doing. But if we can move to real-time predictive compliance in a variety of areas, all under the banner of risk management, that we could move to really a seat at the table because we're integral to business operations. And I wanted to maybe ask you to talk about the evolution you've seen, once again, not from your compliance eyes, but from your business eyes.
Yeah, I think it's not like that clean of an answer. I think our industry has sort of transferred from this sort of toddler stage where it was really just about keeping the boss out of jail to this sort of adolescent phase where most of us find ourselves now. I talk about this motivation triad all the time because at its core, ethics and compliance is about changing behavior. And all of us as human beings are wired to do things to either A, avoid pain, B, seek some kind of efficiency, or C is next, I guess, C, seek pleasure. And historically, I've seen compliance focus just on A. It's just focused on pain avoidance. Obviously valid, right? Like we're human beings. We don't like pain. Businesses don't want regulatory fines and all that kind of stuff. But as we can start to move, and I think initially it was just that first one, I think a lot of us are focused on efficiency, but the efficiency is really kind of sequestered and sort of limited to perhaps our own departments. I think as this next stage, or as I've seen sort of forward programs really evolve, they're evolving into C, more pleasure seeking, i.e. tying what they're doing to what the business cares about, what the shareholders and what the board cares about. They can do that in some better ways. And they're finding some ways to really improve efficiency throughout the organization. So that's kind of the evolution that I've seen. I feel like a lot of us, though, like, again, we're never going to be able to ascend to this sort of third bucket, the top of the mountain, if we don't sort of break out of the mold that like we've been in.
Nick, what are your thoughts on moving from a reactive program to a truly proactive or even predictive program? Is that something that either you guys are working on or you've seen and you're going to incorporate going forward?
Yeah, I think like everything, technology is never going to be a silver bullet. And just to kind of bring it back to this, the AI potential is massive to expand. It's such a point of leverage for us to do more stuff. But if we're just relying on one aspect, if we're just relying on technology and we don't have those other relationships, then we're never going to have the trust that is like a prerequisite to get brought in sooner. And the worst thing we can be is a barnacle on the ship. The best thing we can be is like the headlights on the car. And for us to get brought into things sooner, people I think need to know us, know where to look, and know what they need to ask us about. There is a tendency, this is like high level, but there's a tendency for quote unquote cost centers to kind of sit in the passenger seat of the car. And I think we all have high agency, and it's on us to grab the steering wheel of our lives and solve for the outcome that we're trying to solve for. In many cases, that's obviously what this whole series is going to be about, how we can do things differently. But I think it's also about building those relationships and trotting a path through the forest that is your organization so that you can be brought in sooner and people can realize and recognize that, okay, if I bring this person in, or if I bring this department in, or if I can come and ask a question of these folks, then I'm going to be able to do my job better. So maybe to boil that all down, I think when we have that others focus and we are able to make those connections and we can be a true servant to the organization, it's a lot easier for them to feel like we're kind of part of the team, as opposed to feeling the standard stereotype of the hall monitor or whatever kind of causes people to keep us at arm's length.
Nick, one of the things that I wanted to do in this book, and I was actually able to do, is in addition to provide lessons learned for the compliance professional and things to think about, I took a look at business cases and what has been reported in the business literature where companies used AI. Now, what I found stunned me, Nick, because companies have been using AI basically for the last 10 years. They just didn't call it AI.
Right.
They called it data analytics or data. And my favorite one is probably Citibank which built out an entire AML compliance program based around data analytics. Now, I don't know the cost, that was never reported, but it's Citibank. So my suspicion was it was hundreds of millions, if not billions, because it was completely bespoke. And it did exactly what it was designed to do, which was look at all the transactions, identify anomalies, not say this is bad or good, but just identify anomalies. And then that went to a different area for additional investigation. That was 2018. We're now at 2025, and you don't have to have $100 million. You don't have to have millions of dollars. You can have a cost-effective Gen AI-based data analytics program today. And so that was the other message I wanted to communicate to compliance professionals. The future really is now. And I maybe wanted to ask you if you're sort of what you see about the future being now and how far we've evolved in what we used to call looking at data.
Yeah, I don't know. I just like 5, 10 years ago, there was a lot more excuses that people could make about things, about the impact that they're not having because they don't have a data analyst on their team, or they don't have a graphic designer on their team, or whatever. I just think so many of those have been removed with AI, and I'm excited for the additional episodes on this where we're going to be getting very tactical in these different aspects of a program. But my son plays lacrosse, and I'm always just yelling. I yell a lot at lacrosse games, but I'm always like yelling, put the ball in the net. Like, you just have to figure out a way to put the ball in the net. Like, that's the game. And it's just kind of, in some ways, never been easier for us as compliance folks to put the ball in the net. Like, whatever those impediments are, whatever that lack of budget is, there is a way with a little bit of work and a little bit of research and a little bit of playing around with these tools to start solving for those outcomes. And like, at the end of the day, I think there's kind of two maybe aspects or two sides of the compliance coin. One is like an internal and the other is an external. The internal is like, how are we doing our job? How are we fulfilling our mandate in a more effective way? That's what a lot of us spend our time doing. And then sort of the external, the other side of the coin, is how are we influencing those around us, the different stakeholders that we're responsible for influencing, whether that's the people on the front lines, the middle managers, the people at the management level. And again, with these new tools, we can really leverage them in so many ways. We'll be getting into it, I'm sure, but I'm just saying it's never been easier for us to put the ball in the net. And it's never been like the path to making our vision a reality is like within grasp now. But again, like we said at the start of the conversation, it's going to take us engaging in some new ideas and trying some new things and trying to build some new muscles. But if we're not building, we're destroying. If we're not growing, we're kind of dying. And we need to pick which side of that fence we're going to be on.
I'd like to maybe, Nick, now turn to the human experience and operational impact. And I have said for years that compliance should be about the UX or the user experience. I'm going to take you back and even draw upon your brother to talk about when you guys first purchased Ethico at a different name of the company, but now Ethico. And from day one, you guys were talking about the user experience. And that user could be the compliance officer, but it also was the employee or the customer of the compliance function. And with that sort of background, I wanted to cite to you, Hema Lomax was one of the women or people I interviewed for the book. And she said there's actually two customers of a compliance program, obviously the employees, but also third parties. So we even split it further down to EX, or the employee experience, but the third party experience, the CX. And I wanted to maybe draw upon you and your background with Ethico, how you guys have always focused on the UX or the user experience, and how you see AI can actually enhance that and both the CX going forward.
Yeah, something I stole unashamedly from Hema is this concept of crowdsourcing risk intelligence. I think that's really what our job is at the end of the day, because we can't do it by ourselves, right? So we need that interaction of all of these stakeholders that could be sort of risk sensors. We have these human beings that come in contact with our business, whether they are employees or whether they are third parties, that can be human sensors for the kinds of risks that we are trying to identify. And I think the most successful programs, the most successful compliance people are constantly thinking about how they can improve that experience, so to speak, that CX, as you call it, or that UX, that employee experience, or that user experience. And I think when we can activate these human sensors, we can then direct our efforts, which are limited, right? Our time is limited, our resources are limited. We can kind of stack the deck in our favor and direct those resources towards like the fires that are raging the most. So I think there's a lot of ways to do it, like systematically, whether that's like doing an analysis of your case management system, uploading a CSV file of your cases into ChatGPT and letting the data analytics run and say, what are some things that are popping out? And again, all of these things are just like, there's no silver bullet in any of these games because so much stuff is changing all the time. And the best we can come up with, like the best answer we can come up with is really some kind of a hypothesis that should increase the odds of the next round of betting. Do we want to continue to investigate this thing? So I think like from a user experience perspective, an employee experience perspective, there's a lot we can do, not only to direct our efforts towards employee issues or different types of cases that might require more attention, but I think there's a lot we can leverage. Again, I'm still just talking about like user experience. There's a lot we can leverage using AI to do what I call a pattern interrupt. So like the most successful marketing comes at you from a bunch of different angles, and marketing departments are constantly trying to figure out new ways of interrupting the pattern. Just look at Coca-Cola. They've been selling the same formula for, I don't know, 100 plus years, but they're constantly reinventing themselves and they're constantly coming at you with the message of enjoy a Coke, like a bunch of different ways across different platforms in different mediums and so forth. So we have that opportunity now. Like the excuse is gone because of two reasons. I think one is like the ease with which we can create content for the users to influence them, because that's what our job is at the end of the day, right? If a culture is just the sum total of behaviors of an organization and the beliefs of that group of people that form that organization or form that group, then we have the opportunity to influence those behaviors. And so we should be leveraging these technologies to try to pierce the veil of attention, which is perhaps thicker than it's ever been, but there's sort of a countervailing force where while attention spans are lower, so is the bar for what people will watch, right? My grandparents would only watch Walter Cronkite, right? High production value. Like my wife watches TikToks, okay, that are recorded in cars half the time with a shaky cam, right? So that's not unique to my wife. That bar has dropped for everybody. And we have a democratization of like content creation. We have a democratization of creativity, let's say, because really you can do so much brainstorming and you can leverage so much creativity from AI. And you also have a lower standard for what people can watch. So that's saying that when I first got into the space of people need to hear things 7 times, seven ways, that's like a cool that's like a cool saying, but that's like kind of a platitude, or like it was a platitude. Now it doesn't have to be a platitude. That can be an actual mandate because we can rip out the same message a bunch of different ways. And you can download CapCut on your phone and generate an AI avatar, or you can generate a UGC, a user-generated content avatar for your program, for example. And you can start rolling this out across your different platforms. That's kind of user-based, user experience centric kind of an answer. There's just so many different applications of this thing. It's almost like saying, well, what can you use the internet for? It's like the internet is used for everything. So AI is going to be kind of 10x of, I think, the internet's impact. The internet's impact relative to like the fax machine is going to be similar to AI relative to the internet. So we're going to see, you're probably going to be able to write 5 or 6 editions of this book over the next 2 or 3 years. You know what I mean? So I think there is a lot of opportunity to create this leverage and like I said, put that ball in the net. For the third party thing, I think that's ultimately going to be a function of what risk those third parties present and like what opportunities for like additional risk identification you can get from those third parties. And I think that's going to be different from business to business. And it's going to be probably a function of how those third parties interact with your business. If it's very transactional, then there's probably going to be some things like you could build way easier than the AML tool that you cited that Citibank built to analyze that data faster. Like our job is not to sort through haystacks. Our job is to find the needles. And so with AI, we can really use that as a magnet, particularly on the third party side, where there's many times a lot more data that we can sort of drown in. We can use that really as a magnet to, again, focus our efforts on the things that matter most. Look, we're never going to de-risk everything. One thing, though, speaking of risk, that you said that I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about is this shift you've said this a few times, shifting into a real kind of a risk management posture within the organization. I've talked to some people on our podcast that have started to make that shift, and they've talked about how impactful that's been, not just for their own career and the new lens through which they can view the business, but also how they are viewed and how their concerns are viewed. Where do you see that going? Do you feel like that's accelerating? And like, how do you think people could start to accelerate that more for their own program?
Nick, that's exactly the reason I wrote this book. I want compliance professionals to understand that we are no longer here to wag our finger and say, don't pay bribes. We are here to enhance business value through building risk management platforms directly into business operations. And every compliance professional understands how to identify, assess, and manage risk. And if we take that framework that we've all learned, mirror that, or rather pair that with AI so that it can be done almost instantaneously, we will be directly embedded into the business operations. Business people will come to us and say, we're thinking about this. What does it show? Management will come to us and say, we just had the 1,000-year flood in the Texas Hill Country that has never flooded, Tom. What do we do Monday? And we will have an answer, because it's the management of risk. There are no black swan events. There's only risk. And that compliance can take up their game to become true risk management professionals through the use of generative AI and whatever comes down the road. And as you said, the profession will be taken very differently. The individual compliance officers will be elevated. And frankly, you and I will have a ton of fun, because what we get to do is help companies manage that risk and go to the next iteration.
Yeah, and back to that Hui Chen article, who I love, by the way. She's such a great forward thinker, and I've just learned so much from her. But it's such an opportunity for us to up our game and show up different. Like I was talking about pattern interrupt with respect to the workforce who has some view of us and say, oh, here's the office of no and all that kind of stuff. We can show up in some different ways, a lot easier now to break that pattern and reframe how they view us. But how about our counterparts? How about leadership who have a view of us as, we don't really get it? It's very easy now for us to really start innovating and for us to show that, hey, we are rowing right alongside all you other folks, all you other leaders in the business. We're rowing really hard. We're trying to innovate, and we're trying to add value. If somebody's not bringing you into a conversation, it's because they don't think that's going to be valuable for them. Everybody is self-focused. Everybody is trying to maximize their own utility in life. And I think it's never been easier today it's easier than it's ever been for us to really kind of like close that gap, that utility gap with our counterparts in the organization.
Nick, that brings us to the end of this episode. I greatly look forward to continuing this conversation.
This is going to be a lot of fun, man. Thank you.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.